Nice. So you know
Great.
what I'm talking about. Something like that. Cool. So I will introduce myself though. I'm Henk Varkvisser. I'm doing this business intelligence training, which is really about first of all what business intelligence is and what you need to know to look at business intelligence in the right way. And then I will also talk about a bit about the tools and visualization tools of data itself. So this is targeted normally at salespeople. So I hope there are at least some salespeople in this meeting. So it's more, I try to do this as a story for you to understand what's behind it so you can use that in sales conversations. That's really what I'm after trying to learn you. And at the same time, learning you a little bit about, what kind of data do we store? What can you potentially do with it? Another level is how do you demonstrate? And I hope we will have the time to go into that a little bit at least. Further, I'm open to any questions at any time. So just put it in the chat or raise your hand. I think that's the normal procedure, isn't it, Damien? I guess you did
Yes.
this in previous trainings also. Just raise your hand and then
Yeah.
I hope I will
Good.
see it. And if not, then bad luck.
Nice.
Okay,
Okay.
so I will just start. And again, interrupt me if you need. So this is about business intelligence and Qmatic, of course. So sort of what we do with business intelligence. But I normally start with what is business intelligence in the first place? What does it actually mean? And this is a generic talk, so this is not specific Qmatic. But if you look at what is business intelligence, and you would look that up in Google, you would probably find 500 different definitions. Things like it's a broad category of applications and technologies for gathering, storing, analyzing, and providing access to data to help enterprise users make better business decisions. Something like that you will find. Or BI applications include the activities of decision support systems, query and reporting, online analytical processing, statistical analysis, forecasting, and data mining. All these kind of definitions fall in BI. But the magic word in here, there's sort of one word in here which always comes back, and that's decision or decisions. And that's what business intelligence is really around. It really is made for input to people or organizations to make the right business decisions. That's what business intelligence is about. So if BI exists to support making the right decisions, then that is something for you also to understand, for sure, as a salesperson. I get a lot of questions around BI. I'm working in this business for around 30 something years, and I got an enormous amount of questions around um, business intelligence, reporting, data, and all that. And I always have in the back of my mind, why are they asking this? What are they going to do with that information? And it boils down to what kind of decision can you actually make if I give you that information one way or the other? So always take that in mind a little bit. And then I learned in my lifetimes that there are clients who ask for business intelligence related questions, which are actually not really business intelligence, or it is very unclear what they can actually do with it. So there's very often a question behind the question, as you call it. So, and I'm very often looking for those questions because sometimes, or very often actually, there are better ways to provide them with something which they can base their decision on. So I have some examples, and I can probably give you 20 pages of examples here. But these are some I got recently. Somebody wants to know how many counters were open in a certain time period. And I can do something with that, but there's actually another question behind that. Why do you want to know this? Why do you want to know the number of open counters? And probably probably, and I'm guessing now because they didn't give me the answer, but probably they want to know open counters because they want to have some sort of insight in how many customers walked in and how long did they wait versus how many counters were open, or in other words, how much did my staff members do? Which, by the way, is another question. That's the question: how much time did my staff members spend on serving customers versus how many customers were walking in for what, and how much time do I need to spend on them? So I'm trying to learn you here a bit that, very often there's a question behind the question. I got questions like, I want to know the maximum waiting time. And I'm get a bit like, really? What is it you really want to know? Yeah, I want to know how long customers wait. They probably want to know how many customers waited too long. Because take in mind, there's only one maximum waiting time. There's one customer with the maximum waiting time. So if I look at the maximum waiting time over a month, then I'm looking at the waiting time of only one customer. You cannot base a decision on that. You cannot say because one customer waited 1 hour and 10 minutes, I'm going to change something in my business processes. You do that on other information. So these are some examples of what you should think of when you talk about business intelligence and data and all that. So that was just some preview on, going further with this. How does that link then to what we do? And we are in the business of customer experience or customer journey management. I can spin that story in many different ways, or appointments and queuing, but at the end we have systems and they generate data. And what does that mean actually? So in general, you could say, how does business intelligence help making the right decisions? That you need to understand 4 things. You need to know or have a knowledge about 4 different things. You need to understand them. And those 4 things are the next one. You need to understand or know the system which generates the data. You have to have some understanding on what events do we store and how do we aggregate data. It's very good to understand, especially in sales conversations, which persons do need what data and when do they need it. So who needs what and when. And next to that, last but not least, yeah, it might be good to have some tools and applications to visualize data. And that is actually the 4th one at the end. I'm going to be very ugly here, Damien. Simon, Mifsud, either listen to me or close your camera. Okay. So when we start with this, let's look at the first one. It's the system generating the data. So what system are we talking about? Obviously, we're talking about Qmatic systems here. I'm not going to talk about any other systems here than the Qmatic system. So what is it you need to know about a Qmatic system before you understand or can look at our data? And I have a few slides around that to kind of help you. You have to have some understanding of how the journeys are for our clients' customers are configured. So visualizations I use are things like this. This is a very generic solution, you could say. I don't know if you've seen those pictures before. Damien, do you use those in any of your presentations, actually? I used them in my training slides once, but...
Yeah, I've used quite a few of them, yeah.
So these are simple visualizations of what a customer goes through. And this is quite simple. Customer walks in, goes into an Intro 17, they get a ticket, they wait, then they are served, or and then they leave. It's that simple. But it could look different. It could also look like this. And in this case, it's a customer who scans a QR code, they get a mobile ticket, they're still outside the building. So they're not in the building, they're still outside. They could be in their car, in a shopping mall, or sitting somewhere reading a newspaper. Then they get a message, it's time for them to be served. Then they go in and then they're served and then they leave. Now you could say it's the same process, they get into a queue, it's still a system which is queuing. But if I know they work that way, I would look at the data in another way, because I know they're not waiting in a building looking at monitors. They're waiting somewhere outside. They could have a coffee, they could sit in the car, whatever else. And that means the criteria for how long customers wait are different. It might be okay for them to wait longer, for example. And another thing you have to realize, if somebody, let's say, sits in the car and then needs to go inside, it might probably take a little longer before they are there. So also transaction times, therefore, are extended by times it takes for a customer to walk inside the building. And it could look completely different like this, where there are appointments involved. So people book appointments, then they walk in and they check in for their appointment. Then you have to have a whole other look at what is waiting time exactly. Just to give you an example, I could have an appointment at 10 o'clock, but actually arrive at 9:30. In a normal report, you would see half an hour waiting time up till 10 o'clock, which is my appointment time. Is that really waiting time, or is it something else now? We do store the time, but you have to just realize you have to look at data in a slightly other way, because it's a waiting time in that case of a customer which arrived way too early for their appointment. So it's not so bad that they waited half an hour. It was sort of waiting time on their own account. Now I give you these examples because if you look at data and you just simply pull out a report and it shows something, I think it's almost impossible to interpret numbers in a report without knowing how the system works. or how the system is configured, or what parts of the system they use. Do they use appointments or not? How do they queue? What are walking times? Is the waiting area very far away from the counters or not? That kind of information you sort of need to know. And then you need to understand some of the configuration. And I don't know if you had training already on this part of the system, or if that's even part of the training, Damien. I might be asking questions which are stupid or show things which are stupid, but
no,
this is
we've been looking at this.
Yeah, so this is a typical, very simple setup of a queuing profile. 2 services, they go into a queue and they're called by staff members. Pretty straightforward. But there are already kind of interesting numbers in here. For example, a service level waiting time, which you can report against. But it could also look much more complex like this, where there are many more services, there are segmentation rules, customers are put into other queues based on appointments. We have a lot of different work profiles here, which tells me as a BI user how are customers called? Is there any priority order? Are certain customers called before other customers? And that's the kind of information you have to understand the data itself. So coming back, you need to understand the system generating the data. Also, what are the service levels? I already mentioned those. Is there a service level set for certain services or queues? Because you see in certain standard reports, for example, a percentage customers waiting longer than service level. Then you also need to know what the service level is. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And are there specific work profile settings, as I already mentioned? Now, the customer journey management basics, I sometimes went through this, Damien, or shall we skip it this time? This is just simply said this story. We have service goes into a queue and there's a counter who calls them and you use a work profile to call customers. I will skip it for now. And we use things for that. So, but it could also look like this: 4 services, 4 queues, and they're called by a specific work profile. And in this case, I use another work profile where there are service levels set. If this is something you don't understand, then I'm just put those slides in because it's good to understand that if you use certain functionality in our system, you also have to look at data in another way sometimes. That's the main reason I put those slides in. And I will skip those. Now, the last thing you need to know, or not the last thing, you need to know a lot. That's why you're in trainings, isn't it? But there's another thing which is sometimes quite good to understand, at least, and that is specific functions and features we have in our solutions and knowing if they are used or not. And a few examples of those are customers, for example, transferred in the process? And I have looked a lot at data from different clients, and this is one of the things I always try to find out. How is their configuration? A little bit in detail. Do they transfer customers? Do they transfer customers to pools? I've seen situations where almost every customer is always transferred. It's really depending on the business. I can give you one example where there's a case where every customer takes a queue number, they end up at the desk, they are served, but then they had to do a payment, and the payment was always done at other desks. So almost all customers were always transferred to a payment desk. The reason for that was that this client didn't have enough money to put payment machines on every desk. It can happen. But it's good to understand that that happens because you see that back in data. You see every customer being waiting. You see a waiting time for every customer twice, and you see transaction time for every customer twice. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you don't know that that's happening in the process, you would look at data in the wrong way. Another function is confirm. I don't know if you know what it is, but it is something you can switch on or off in our system. And some clients use this and others don't. And confirm is nothing else than a function that when I call a customer and the customer arrives at my desk, I confirm that the customer arrives at my desk. But in other cases, they just call the customer and they just wait until the customer is there. They don't do anything else. They just start serving them. There's nothing wrong with any of those 2 methodologies, but you do see differences in data because in the use confirm scenario, you do see walking times because then you start measuring how long does it take for a customer to walk from the waiting area to a desk. So that's why I look at those things. Do they use those kind of functions? Because those functions also have an effect on what data do you see, what data can you analyze on, etc., etc. Any questions on that? Otherwise, I just keep talking and we're done in 15 minutes. Nah, not really. Okay. And then, of course, last but not least, are appointments used? Because if your client uses appointments, then almost everything around data starts to change. Appointments is a whole other thing. It's not a queuing thing. It's not queuing theories anymore. You cannot look at data in the same way. Waiting times change because they are depending on when the customer have an appointment, etc., etc. Take that in mind. So this was a story around the system which generates the data. Oh, I had more slides. So sorry, I forgot this one. So if you look at appointments, then you have to look also at other configuration parts of the system. For example, what are slot lengths for an appointment? If you allow customers to book an appointment for, let's say, 10 minutes, then it becomes really interesting to benchmark that against how long does my staff member actually spend on an appointment. If that on average is 12 minutes, maybe your slot lengths are wrong. But if your slot lengths are 30 minutes and you start analyzing how long does it take for my staff member to serve a customer with a 30-minute appointment, and that turns out to be 20 minutes, then you could reason that my staff member is not doing anything for the other 10 minutes. And then it might be interesting to look into maybe I should change my slot lengths. And that's a decision. You see my point? That's a business decision. And for that, you need BI. You need to be able to take that decision funded by data. So I would then analyze what are my slot lengths and how long does it take my staff members to serve those customers. And if there's a big discrepancy, maybe I need to change the configuration of the system based on that. And that's a business decision. And could have a huge impact. If I change slot lengths from 30 minutes to 20 minutes, suddenly I can serve 3 customers per hour instead of 2. That's how you should think about these things. Make sense? Cool. There we go. Where are we? So that was the story around the system which generates the data, and it's just more than just the system. It's also how is it configured, which functions and features do they use? Do they use appointments? Do they use confirm? Do they use recycle? Do they use transfer? And I know I throw in a lot of functions and features which you might not know, but you will learn them for sure, or I hope so at least, because this is also those functions also have an effect on how your client uses the system. And in a way, for me, it's also a way to sell the system. So what is the next thing? That is understand events and aggregation. So this is a bit of a story around the data we store itself. And I will come back to this later when I show a real system. And maybe that's even easier to understand than this. And this is just a drawing of what happens in a system. And it's just an example, you could say. But this is customers who book an appointment. They arrive for their appointment. They are called for their appointment. They might be recalled. There's a confirm function here. In this case, the customer is also transferred, is made callable. I will leave that for now, but it is a sort of, you put them in a holding queue or in holding status before they can be called. They're called, that's confirmed again, wrap up and visit end. And all this is stored as events, you could say. And from that, you can calculate other measures like transaction times and waiting times and service times and walking times and I don't know what. But you kind of have to understand the process here to also understand all these kind of different dimensions and measures. Okay. And I have an example here, which I just wanted to point out how things work. We have a system which is called mobile ticket, and I guess you know mobile ticket. It's ability for a customer to get into a queue using their mobile device. I don't get a piece of paper with a number on it, but we actually show it on a screen on their mobile device. And I don't think we have released it yet, but we will soon. And that is the ability for a customer to, you could say, delay their visit. Because the problem with mobile ticket is that if I get into a queue, I could potentially be called right after that. But I might not even be in the branch because I can be somewhere else. I can still be outside. I can still be on my bike or in the car. Bike is a bit of a Dutch thing. I'm Dutch, sorry for that. But I could still be 10 minutes away from the branch or maybe half an hour. So what we want to do is to allow the customer to say, hey, I'm going to be later. For example, I'm going to be 10 minutes later. And what we do in the system, we make it impossible for that customer to be called for those 10 minutes. And when the customer arrives, he can say, I'm here, and then they can be called. Or that customer can also say, I select another time, and then you can delay yourself again. So there's nothing wrong with this functionality for customers. It's actually a great functionality. But if you then would look at data, it would of course have an effect. Because if a customer says, I need 10 more minutes, what we actually do is we make this customer, we delay this customer for that time. So they're not callable for that time. It also means that if you look at waiting time, it's still measured from, I should actually say here, from arrive till call. So this function is a great function, but my expectation is that if our clients start to use it, we will actually see higher waiting times. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but there is this interpretation of a lot of people, waiting time is bad, so they need to be as low as possible. But what you say with this function is actually, you can wait longer and we don't care.
But Hank,
But yeah,
is it possible to program it in such a way that you actually deduct that delay from that little app that when the consumer, the customer themselves say they want to delay?
it's a good way. It's good you say that, Bengt. What I actually don't think we should do is redefine what waiting time is. There's a definition of that, and it goes from, I should actually go here, from arrive to called. So what you talk about is I would rather have an additional metric, which is all these delay times. And then, of course, in any tool, you could do you could of course do the math, so to say.
Yeah, the real waiting time and
yeah.
Yeah.
The real waiting time has also a definition, but
yeah.
let's not go there. No, but those are absolutely the good questions. Yes, what we really want to do is to show that somehow in the data that you have those waiting times. There's a definition of waiting time, but the reason that the waiting time is a certain value is because a lot of customers delay themselves. And that's what you really want to show. So you're absolutely right, but I don't want to recalculate waiting times because then you lose the delay times. I'd rather have both, but I make it a bit too technical now, maybe. But good question. Any more? Otherwise, I keep flying, as I say. I did something similar for appointment times. So here also you get some metrics in there. For example, tardiness time, which is people did arrive but they were not called yet, and things like that. So you don't have to understand all of this, but you get a lot of different metrics when you talk about appointments. Also, waiting time, you could say, changes, although it becomes then an appointment waiting time and a before appointment waiting time and an after appointment waiting time. And the after is more important for your client than before. The after appointment time is the waiting time where the point where you actually as an organization were too late serving the customer. Because if you have an appointment at 10 and you call them at 10:30, the customer is probably not so happy because that customer felt I had an appointment at 10 and you call me half an hour later. So those are the important metrics, so to say. Okay. So what you need to know, what we do in our data, we store actions, as we say it, or as time-related events. So this is a bit, wording I use. We store all the actions in the system, and added to that, we use attributes or dimensions as branches and entry point, which are kiosks and receptions and concierges, service points or counters or desks. We use different names for in our organization, but staff members, and of course time and date and all these kind of things. So all that is stored in data, so we know what happens in the customer journey management process, you could say. We know when they arrive, what service they want, how long they waited, their transaction times, etc., etc., etc. Although this is just what we store as data. So you could ask the question, do you really know by storing? And of course not. You need to then look at data, you need the visualization tools. But before we go there, I have one other story, and that is the who needs what and when. And I put that in later in my trainings because it's something I learned myself when talking as a salesperson or a pre-salesperson to clients. I start to realize there are different levels of needs depending on who you talk to. So I started to create things like this, and I try to simplify it a bit here, but I think you all understand that any organization has an operational part, a tactical part, and a strategic part. So I think it's also good when you talk to clients to understand who's sitting in front of you. You know, if I talk to a C-level manager, then that person is on a certain level of what they want to know from a system, from a data system, you know, as business intelligence. A C-level manager like a CEO or a CFO probably is not so interested in, let's say, is counter 7 open and who sits there and what are they doing there? Now, that is much more on an operational level. And we have sort of tools and functions for all those different levels. So I put up some questions here, which I run into in my lifetime. You know, they asked us for help. You know, we would like to know what the cost per customer per branch is to do something with that, or we would actually like to know, should we open more branches in region A? And it's not even only our data they base their decision on. Our data, the Qmatic data, can help them take those kind of decisions with showing them, you know, you got 5 branches in region A and one of them has, you know, almost no customers and many more staff members than you need, and kind of discussions like that you could have. On technical level, it's much more like, you know, do we reach our service level? A typical example of a service level is we don't want our customers to wait longer than 10 minutes, just as an example. And then they want to know, you know, do we reach that or not? And of course, there are questions after that. You know, when you don't reach those service levels, what do you do then? But I will park that a bit and talk about that a little bit later, how you can look at that. But also staff benchmarking is very much in the it's a bit in operation, but I park it more in the tactical level. You know, can I benchmark my staff members? And I will show you an example of that later, how you could do that, for example. But very operational is, should I open one more counter? What the operational side is really about what is happening at this moment. How many people are in my waiting areas? How many counters are open? Who sits at which counter? What are they doing? Maybe some predictions around that even. But that's really what operational is about. I'm running the 2-day shows, and very often we see there are people responsible for that. And we can help them with our data one way or the other. So I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. It's good for salespeople to understand who am I talking to and what is their level of interest. So that brings me to the last subject, and which is really about the tools and applications to visualize data. And we as Qmatic, we do have tools. We deliver tools, you could say. You can sell tools, can I put it that way? They are products in our product range, so you can sell those tools. But all the 3 subjects I talked about before is I want to plant those seeds in your heads to have some understanding of this, because, and I'm not criticizing you, I'm just criticizing other people. Let's put it that way. I'm going to be really nice here. But I have seen examples where people straight away start to talk about the different types of reports and all these things. Oh, we have 25 different reports. Let me show you an example. And I don't think that's the right way to sell this. I really don't think so. It's really about, you know, what is the value of our data? And a report is just a report. It's just one of those ways to visualize data. That's all it is. All it is. I mean, it's still very powerful, but anyway. So what kind of tools are we talking about? But before I go to all the tools, there's one remark I want to make, and that is, and I already mentioned that a bit when we talked about those different levels with the triangle, you know, the operational level versus tactical versus strategic. You could say, if I simplify it, our systems provide 2 types of data, and one is live data and the other one is statistical data. So live data is what's happening now. There are 5 people in the waiting area, and one customer is waiting 6 minutes and 1 second. Now it's 2 seconds. Now it's 3 seconds. Oh, now counter 5 opens. That's really live data. That's really what about the now. And statistical data is about what happened yesterday and years before, or depending on how long you have the system. Okay. Now, live data we don't show in anything else at the moment than what we call operation panels. I don't know if you've seen those already, but I will show you them something around that later. But that's really for an operational manager. It's a sort of dashboard, you could say. It's a little bit more than a dashboard because you can actually interact with the system. That's why we choose the name operation panel. But it really tells you what's happening at the moment. But the statistical data, for that we use Qmatic insights, reports, and analysis, and that's the only thing they show. Although there are a bit of gray areas. So for example, in an operation panel, I can also see how many customers were served up till now today. And then you could say that's actually statistical data, because what happened this morning is statistical data versus what's happening right now. But it's a small gray area. And in the reporting tools and analysis and insights, you can actually see how many customers are served up till now today. So our historical data tools, they show every customer which has left the building, you could say. At the moment they leave the building, they're done, they leave, the transaction is closed, then they are, then you would see them in statistical data. Take that in mind. So we sometimes refer to that as near live data in statistics, but it's not live data. It doesn't show you there's now 6 customers waiting. It only showed you a customer is served, so many customers are served in the last half hour, for example. Take that in mind. Now the tools, there we go. We have an operation panel. I think I already mentioned what that is. There are some varieties in that, but we try now to consolidate one operation panel, which we release now in all our systems. In Orgza, for example, this one the latest version you will find in Extend. You see probably another picture here, which is the white one, and that is due to our new identity. So we did create another one, but it's basically showing the same information, but it has a green logo. Let's put it that way. Compared to the black one, which was with the old logo and all that. But that's just a styling exercise. It's nothing more than that. Then we have what we call reports. And also there we do an exercise that we already in some of our systems, we updated the reports to new identity. But the report set is basically the same. And I will talk more about reports later. And then we have analysis reports, but analysis reports is only available in Qmatic Orchestra on-prem. So analysis reports is not available in managed service or Qmatic Cloud solutions. I know this is sometimes a bit confusing. I'm actually product manager of this. And if you ask me, Dasha, we want to remove it all. It's a bit cumbersome because we sort of have different tools in different parts of our solution. And that doesn't make it easier for you salespeople to talk about which tool am I going to demonstrate, which tool am I going to talk about, is this client going to be an on-prem client, are they going to be a cloud client? And then your story has to change a little bit. So unfortunately for you, that is how it is at the moment. I think I will talk a little bit about the future in a later slide.
Quick question.
Sure.
Just don't want to make it too complicated for others, but don't we sometimes install analytics reports on managed service?
No, my simple answer is no. We only did that once as an exception, and we don't want to do that again.
Okay.
And that was an existing client with using that tool and kind of mandated that I needed the same tool in cloud, but it's absolutely not what we want to do. It's too expensive if you take it short.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And then we have Qmatic Insights. So Qmatic Insights is the tool we use for our managed service and Qmatic Cloud solution clients. So they don't have this Pentaho analysis report. There we actually use a whole other tool, which is more a dashboarding tool. Where we have an overlap, or where you could say the systems are the same or are gonna be the same completely on a near term, shortly, is the reporting tool. We're going to use the same reporting and the same reports for all our solutions. That is both cloud solutions, managed service, and on-prem. And soon we will talk more about the data API, but I have a little bit more information about that later. Am I allowed to talk about it, Dasha? Say yes. So I have more slides in detail on operation panel, and I don't know how detailed I need to go into this, but I normally give those, and I think, Damien, you have this deck already, so you will send it out to people. So it's more like, it's good to have this information in the deck I'm showing anyway, so you kind of can go through this. But what the operation panel is about, it shows you the current situation, and you can do some clicking in this because it shows a sort of overview for all branches, but you can, so this is the branch view. But you can actually click on one of those branches and then you get a queue view for that specific branch. And then you can click on a service point view for that specific branch. And in that service point view, you can even change the work profile for a counter if you want to. Oh, sorry, that was it. I think I missed one, because we actually also have one which shows some customer feedback data if customer feedback is part of the solution, but I don't have that as an example in my screenshots. But that's really what an operation panel is about. And this is, I think, one of the most used tools after counter and concierge or reception. It's used quite a lot. I sometimes look at some statistics, you know, Augusta sales statistics, I mean. What do we actually sell? And I forgot the exact number, but I think it's 87 or 89% of our solutions include the operation panel as a license. It's a licensed option. So almost all our clients use this one way or the other. Which of course is good, but it also means that maybe we should do some newer versions, but I don't want to talk about that too much now. That's future plans. But again, this shows you what's happening right now. That's the most important part. And it's actually an enterprise ops panel. So we do have clients which have people sitting on a more central location looking at several branches. So they have an overview over all those branches, but then they can go into the detail of all those individual branches. And I've seen situations in the US, for example, where there are people really assigned to do that. They keep a close watch on what's happening in all those branches. And if they see some numbers going up too much, they take action. They start calling people, or they they even start moving around employees from one branch to another. I've seen those examples also. It's all depending if that's possible, of course. You know, logistically, if those branches are 150 kilometers away from each other, then it's not a good option. But we also have, I remember a case in London actually, where there are several branches very close to each other, and there's really staff members running from one branch to another to help out. And that was all instructed by somebody looking at an operation panel. Okay, and no questions, I continue. So then we talk about reports. Now, our solution comes with a standard set of reports, and those are, I would say, that covers the most common reporting needs. The very normal reporting you want to do on a system we cover in standard reports. There is no so-called designer, and I'm putting that specifically in because there are sometimes clients which have expectations that they can make changes to these reports themselves. And with that, I'm talking about the layout of the report. So which dimensions and metrics does it show? And that is not possible in this. It's a so-called canned report functionality. So we as Qmatic designed that page. That's how it looks like. But of course, you can filter in that. So the report is the report, but if I want to see that for last month, I can make the selection last month. Or I want to see it for only one branch, I can make the selection one branch. But that's where it stops. So you can make selections, as you call it. And then there's a functionality in there which is also used quite a lot, and it's actually very powerful. It's called channel and email. So I can actually set up a report, make some selections in there. For example, I can set up a Q summary report. I just take an example, and I send that once per week on every first new weekday about last week to all my branch managers. And I can set up the system to do that automatically. So that means my branch managers don't have to go in all these reporting tools and start to run reports. They get it by email, mostly email, I think. Of course, you have to set that up, but it's a one-time exercise. You know, you just set up the schedules and you type in the email addresses to where the report needs to go to, and then you're done. Now, we do get quite a lot of requests on, I want a report which looks like this, or shows other metrics, or shows things in another way. It could be anything. So yes, we take those in, and very often we do create specific client report. So what did I try to say here? We do develop specific reports on client requests, and that goes through our professional services department. And there is a cost to pay. And by the way, we don't charge our clients for the report, to make absolutely sure you understand that. We charge them for the time it takes to create a report. And that's interesting because for me, it means that the report is still owned by Qmatic. The intellectual property rights are owned by us. So if some product manager like Henk thinks this is a good report, I would like all my clients to have that, then I can decide to put that in the standard report set, although some client paid for the development cost. But that's what the clients understand also when they do a PS request, if everything is okay. So you understand that part. So that's about reports. I might lose my voice today. Not a good idea.
Excuse me, I didn't get this.
Any question?
Yes.
No.
I didn't get the point on for the time creating a report. How do you sell this?
So So it goes like this. If a client has a specific report request that comes into our department called professional services, and they actually do a quote, and the quote says, for example, it takes 4 hours to develop this, and it's 4 times, I don't know exactly what I charge, 100 something euros. So let's say it's 600 euros to create that report. And what the client pays for is the development time of that report. You really pay a developer time.
Okay, so customization. All right.
Yes,
I
it's a
have one.
customized report.
I have one for the ops panel. Is this an overall for all branches or per specific branch? The dashboard.
Ops panel shows all branches. Well, by the way, that is to make absolutely clear. This shows Amsterdam, Berlin, Bern, Budapest, etc. The branches you see as a user of this is depending of the access rights you have in the system. So make that. I hope you understand that, Malik. So if you have a person who's only allowed to see Amsterdam, then they will see only Amsterdam. But you define that somewhere else in the system. You define that in the user access rights. To which branches does a specific user have access? And that's what that user can also only see in the dashboard or in the operation panel.
Okay, my question is somehow similar to what you're saying. Instead of having different ops panel per branch, we can give different access right per
Yes.
branch.
Yes.
So basically, we define in the account that he can see specific branch. So basically, the top graphical part will just represent that branch.
Yes. If one person has access to only one branch, they will only see one branch.
Right, clear.
And I show an example here where I'm a sort of supervisor and I can see all the branches in the system, something like that. But it all goes to access rights. So we don't have different versions, one ops panel for branch 1 and another one for branch 2. That would not make sense. It all goes to the access rights of the user. Okay.
Yes.
I think we fulfill your requirement. Let's put it that way.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I was here. So as I already mentioned, it doesn't have a designer. So a report is designed by us. This is an overview per month, and it always looks like this, and it has those metrics and dimensions. And you can make selections. I think I mentioned this already. This is just some screenshots how that looks like. So I can define start and end times. I can say from which date to which date and which branches to include or not include, etc., etc. That's how reporting works. It's very generic. And then you have schedule and email. So I just put in some screenshots and for you to have also when you get this slide deck later. I think I mentioned most of this already. So we did create quite a lot of specific client reports on request. But I also want to say that we sometimes do get requests in where we do struggle with, you could say, where I have questions around at least. And I think I mentioned that in the beginning of this training also, very often there's a question behind what they actually ask for. So I sometimes urge people to be a bit careful with just creating a report which shows what they want, because very often it doesn't really make sense. And their question is actually another question. I give you one like this one, the average wait time at the counter per process. If you think about how our system works, there is no wait time per counter. The wait time is only in a queue. There's no wait time directly linked to a counter until they are called. But the wait time value itself is really depending on how many counters call customers. So this question for me is a kind of, they have another question. They probably want to know something about wait time, but they don't understand that we don't store wait times at counters or something. They probably want to know something else. And we don't have to go into what that really is, but that's how I look at things. The average waiting time by service is also one of those questions, because the waiting time can be linked to the service, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, because there could be several services linked to one and the same queue or called by the same work profile. And that means if you look at wait times, it's much better to look at wait times in relation to the queues than to the services. But it could also just be not understanding the wording and all that. But we do have quite some work figuring out what does this client actually want? What is it they really looking for? Coming back to the beginning, what kind of decisions do they try to make based on this kind of information? That's for me the most important part. That's what I actually really try to figure out always. So the questions I very often ask, do they really know what they ask for? And is it worth making that customized reports? Because there's sometimes also reports where I think, I don't think we should build that really. No, it's not really adding any value for the client. So there is this thing with reports, as I call it, and that's where we often get those customization requests from. So I call it the thing with reports, so bear with me. This is my experience also, but there's a lot of people who work with data will tell you the same story. If you work with reports, very often the report does not give you the answer. It just gives you the next question. If you understand what I'm saying. So it's not like, sometimes it gives me the answer. If I want to know, let's say the average transaction time for a certain service or something, I can probably find it in a report. But what if that value is much higher than I expected? Then it actually generates just the next question. Or if I ask the question, I want to know how many people wait longer than my service level, then it's easy to see that in a report. Let's say 40% or 5 million customers. But what's the next thing? Now I have a next question. But why so many? Why 40%? When does this happen? And that's a bit the thing with reports, as I call it. It very often generates more questions than it actually gives answers. And that's where we sometimes are lured into create yet another report to show something around that question which then popped up. And then it becomes a sort of never ending story. Because then you have to create another report and another report and another report. There is a line or a limit, you could say, where till how far can you go with reports? So another way of looking at data is not using canned reports, which are designed, but is using a tool like analysis reports. So if you look at that, it gives, analysis, which is only in Orchestra, by the way. I think I mentioned that already, but it is one of those tools where you can slice and dice your data. You can work interactively with your data. So you can drill down, break down, you can sort, you can select, you can deselect. You can ask those questions. So even if you see a number which says, oh, but that's a high number, where does that come from? You can much easier make other selections or build a filter, and then by that find the answer to the question, your next question you had. Make sense? So I think I'm just looking at this here, and this figure shows me that I have in Gothenburg for one of the services, almost 50% of my customers are outside my service level. But all the other ones are okay. And I think this is another branch and that is also okay. So what's happening here? Why is that? If I would do this in reports, I yet have to find another report, make similar selections and try to find out what's happening here. In analysis tool, and I can show you this a bit later how that works, it's much easier to find answers to those questions. You see the difference? Of course, when you think about it, then you also actually talk about another user of the system, if I can say it that way. So a report person is very often the person who just generates those reports or makes schedules and emails them and all that. What I'm talking about now is a person who is much more on a data analyst side. It's a person who wants to dig into the data, and his boss or her boss might have told him, hey, listen, that number is too high. Can you figure out what's happening there? What's happening in branch A with, Gothenburg with service A? Why is this so crazy high, that number? And then try to find that answer. And maybe you even have to look at whole other data sources than ours to find out the correct answer. That's just the point I'm trying to make. And then you do talk about another role in our client's organization, a person which has some understanding around data and knows how to work with that. Okay. And probably, by the way, requires some training on how to use this data, and then also needs some training on how is their system configured to be able to take the right decisions. So I have some examples here, and I don't even remember all of them. I will skip this one. So I looked at this one as daily patterns. How many people walk in when, at what hours of the day, and how many customers arrive, how many were served, and how many were no-shows. And those already give me very often quite a lot of insights on how does one branch, how does one branch compare to another performs. I think I'm going to show you this in real life, so let's not spend too much time on this one. Staff benchmarks. I don't know if you know what it is. By the way, if I think there are some German people here in the training. Mikael? Yeah, you can close your ears. This is not for you. Not allowed in Germany. Anyway, and some other countries I heard. But on the other hand, we do have countries which really look into this. So this is a staff benchmark analysis report where you can quite simply say, just for a specific service, I have a lot of users in different branches, and I can see how many they served and what their average transaction time is. And then some things are actually a bit, you could say, strange. Now I got a user number 5. I anonymize this data, by the way. This is real data from a real client, but of course I don't want to expose real customer names or staff names here. So I call this user 5, and I can see that person served 157 customers, and on average it takes that person 11 minutes and 22 seconds to serve somebody for service 1. But now I take another one, let's say user 21, he or she served 168, but on average it takes only 2 minutes 33. Now, I'm not sure what is right or wrong here. I don't know if 11 minutes is better than 2 minutes 33. You would automatically say that 2 minutes 33 is maybe better. I do know for sure that that person is much faster than the other person, isn't this? You have to be a bit careful here because this only tells you something about quantity and not quality. It could still be that this user 5 actually does a brilliant job, but needs to spend 11 minutes something to do that. And this person does a really lousy job and therefore only needs to spend 2 minutes 33. But still, as a data analyst, I would ask the question, what's happening here? Why is there such a big difference between those average transaction times for my staff members? What's going on? And I have another one in here. Somebody actually managed to serve 127 customers in 7 seconds average. That doesn't make any sense. That something must be wrong here. But this triggers the next question, and I'm not going further in this, but this triggers, have a chat with user 36. What the hell are you doing? It could also be that maybe user 36 is a system administrator and was testing the system and just called 100 something customers to see if the ticket printer worked. Could be, but I would be able to filter that out because of which time of the day they did this and all that. My point being, staff benchmark is used a lot by several organizations to find out, what is the normal average transaction time for a certain service. Take in mind, this is not only good for benchmarks like this is not only good for finding out something around staff members. It's also good to find out what should my slot lengths for appointments be. I don't know if you heard, but my doorbell rang. I need to open the front door to catch a package. Sorry for this. I'm back in a minute, okay? Take a break. Shall we be back in 4 minutes?
Sure.
Hey, Damien.
Hi.
I don't know if everybody's back yet.
I don't know either. Can we have maybe everybody put your hand up or give us a thumbs up or switch your camera on or something just to make sure you're back? Okay.
Otherwise, they have to look at the recording.
Okay, looks like everyone's back.
I think we should continue, yeah?
Yeah, I think
It's
so.
still 4, wasn't it? Or my time.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was the last thing I talked about. Why is this still showing? Okay. Here we go. So another example is related to customer feedback. So customer feedback is this other solution where customers can give feedback, and a typical question you could ask is around waiting time. So an analysis tool is also quite interesting to use to find what you call the tipping point. And that is also related to what kind of service level should I actually use for my customers when it is to waiting time. So waiting time service level I'm talking about here. I will not do the full analysis, but the tipping point is typically the point where customers start to answer your question around waiting time in a way of, I'm not so happy about it. So if you know which customers are start to say, I'm not happy about the waiting time, and you also know their real waiting time, then you can find this so-called tipping point, and that should be your service level waiting time. So I did those exercises in the past with clients to really figure out where should your waiting time service levels actually be. We get that question actually a lot. We ask clients asking us, yeah, but what should our waiting time level be? But the real answer is you should ask your customers, because we don't always know. It's really depending on what do customers want, how are they waiting, what kind of environment are they waiting in, and kind of all those kind of things. They play a role in what customers think is a good waiting time or a bad waiting time. If they ask you and they need an answer, just say 10 to 15 minutes. Always good. So a little bit about the future, because I talked about analysis reports quite a lot, but we do get more and more requests for visualization functions and features. You know, I showed a few screenshots of analysis. I don't know if you noticed, but it's not super modern and it has some limitations. And we do have clients who say, I want to be able to do much more than what you deliver us as a data visualization tool. We do get requests around, you know, we want to combine that data from Qmatic with other data like sales figures or footfall figures or weather or whatnot. Or we want to integrate your data in a whole other tool like a workforce management tool. We want to work with predictive analytics and all that. You know, there's many more questions around that. You know, we get more and more people asking us for more sophisticated data tools, you know, tools around our data. And of course, then we started to ask the question, you know, should we develop that ourselves as Qmatic, so to say, or should we buy a system and incorporate it in our system? But if we develop ourselves, can we actually compete with all these other data visualization tools? And to cut a long story short, we actually are much more on the direction now to come up with a proper data API. So making it easier for clients to integrate with our data in their existing data visualization tools. Now, I will not show you this complete slide. We don't have to go through this, but it comes down to an easier way for our clients to hook up to our data and use any other tool. And those other tools that could be Power BI, Yellowfin, Qlik, you name them. There are quite a lot of those data visualization tools. So this is an example of what we played around. You know, we made something with Power BI. And that's a bit what we're focusing on at this moment. We see that as a quite strong tool used quite a lot by our clients already. You know, it sort of comes with Office 365, so a lot of our clients are in that area. So I think it would be good to use that as an example, at least as a test candidate, as we call it. So that's a bit about the future, and you will hear much more about that in the next weeks, months, probably days, depending on. Okay. So I just made some screenshots where you can also see click-through functionality, for example, which we got a request from one client. They want to be able to click in a dashboard, and then the dashboard, all the other visualizations in the dashboard actually change based on what you clicked on. And that's not really possible for us, but Power BI has that on board. It's a standard functionality in Power BI. So I don't think we should develop that. We should piggyback on all those great tools which already exist. So some real analysis. I have a bit of a small joke in between, or it's not really a joke actually, but I just want to ask you a question. Do you know what the most important CX formula is? This is a whole other subject, so open your brain. We're talking about customer experience here. Do you know the most important formula in customer experience? I'm very old, so I know this one. You might not. No idea? Nobody? I will not spend too much time on this. It's SSP minus E. You know what it means? I guess not. It means satisfaction is perception minus expectation. And I use this quite a lot in my lifetime, also to be able to explain everything around our product. It very often has to do with this. If you talk about our clients' customers and what we can do for them, you can relate quite a lot to this formula. And also when you look at data and waiting times, satisfaction is perception minus expectation. So if I go somewhere as a customer and I expect that I don't have to wait, but my perception is that I waited long, regardless of what the number of waiting time is, my perception is that I waited too long, then I'm not satisfied. And the other way around. So take that in mind. I think it's a great formula. I have some examples here. You can also use this for appointment time. You know, if I book an appointment, my expectation is that you're ready for me at the moment we agreed on having that appointment. At least in the countries, you know, Western Europe and so on. It's a slightly different culture in some other countries, but in the Western world, at least in Netherlands where I come from, that is the expectation. If you're not there for me at the time we agreed, I'm not satisfied. So take this in mind. It comes from Mr. David Meister. And a lot of the customer experience world, which the library of books written after that, I think there are now even customer experience chief officers of customer experience and whatnot. A lot of it is derived from the work of this David Meister when it is to waiting lines. He wrote a few more books also, so might be interesting to have a look at. So if you talk about a real analysis, I did a few of those, and this is purely based on queuing, by the way. This is really a queuing analysis. So this has nothing to do with appointments. If you really think about it, and I will lift that up already, if you look at a queuing situation, queuing by definition has waiting in it, and the solution to waiting is actually appointments. So this is not talking about appointments as analyzing appointments data. This is talking about the queuing side of things where people don't have an appointment, but appointments could be a solution for that. So we did work quite a lot with what we call a 5-step bottleneck analysis. This whole analysis is based on a methodology. I will try to go through this quite quickly, but you know the whole. If you look at the normal queuing situation, then and you look at waiting times, it always has to do with, you know, what is my workload and what is the capacity to serve that workload. In our case, that comes down to how many customers are there, or how many customers will walk in, how many are there already, and how many counters are open with a staff member serving customers. So the bottleneck is always where you have more workload than you actually have serve capacity. Those are the standard queuing definition. This is pure queuing definition. Try to translate it into our systems. Okay. So if you look at it this way, let's say I have, in this case, green people and black people, and the green people, they have an average transaction time of 15 minutes. I know that from statistics, and I know all the black puppets, they take me on average 30 minutes to serve. Then I also know that at this stage, when I look in my waiting area, there is 240 minutes of work to do, which means 4 hours of work. But at the same time, I have a serve capacity of 3 FTEs because I have 3 counters open, which means I can only serve for 3 hours per hour. You still with me? That means a bunch of these customers, they are going to wait for sure, because there's more coming in or already sitting there than I can get out. And that's the basics of a bottleneck, as you call it. And if you analyze Qmatic statistics and you look at queuing scenarios, then you very often see exactly the same theories. So a bottleneck analysis is really working with that theory, understanding that theory, and then it's based on what you call a plan, do, check, act. So I look at something, I do a conclusion, I make a decision, then the whole system starts to work again, and then you keep analyzing if it still works as you actually want it to work. So the basics of this 5-step bottleneck is based on focus on waiting. The customers waited too long. So above my service level, find the largest group of these customers, find the bottleneck, and then act on that. Now these steps are these 5. And the first step is actually not really a data analysis step. It's really a definition you need to have before you can do the analysis. And that is service level waiting time. I need to know what you think is a customer waiting too long or not. So you have to set that level, so to say. And then you can go through how many wait too long, which customers are waiting too long, when do they wait too long, and why do they wait too long. Those are the simple 5 steps. Now I'll quickly go through this. I'm not sure if you will stay with me. So step 1 is, I want to set a service level. And I'm using some real statistics. I did this once for a pilot system, and it's a quite straightforward, simple system. So I think it's also good to use this. So there were actually 3 queues, and they set service levels 10, 30, and 10 minutes for those 3 different queues. So what is my step 2 is how many customers are waiting too long? And in this case, that was 41.7%. So 41.7% of my customers, and they served or called 22,000 something customers. And out of those, a lot of them waited too long, which is like 9,000 something. So it's actually not a real good score, is it? You could, of course, split this up in queues. And by the way, I skipped Q1 here because I found out when I started to look into this that Q1 is actually not used as a real queuing queue, as you call it. It's only used for counting people by a receptionist. So further here, we only look at queue number 2 and queue number 3. But still, if I look at those 2 queues, which are real queuing queues, as you call it, 45.9% waited too long, which is a very high number. And it's of course, well, not of course, but for Q3 it's much higher, 55%, but that probably has to do, they have a much lower service level. So this is how I read those statistics. Take in mind also this average waiting time, that doesn't mean so much. A lot of people talk about, I want to know the average waiting time. I always try to urge that it's much more important to look at waiting time service level. How many customers waited too long is much more important than the average waiting time. So which customers wait too long? That's sort of the next step. I know some numbers now. I know that 55% and 24%, and it's a lot of customers. And then, to continue this, you kind of have to get a group out of these 2 queues in this case. And you have to be a bit careful here because you need to know how they use the system. So I could say, you know what, I continue my analysis on queue number 3. But when I looked at some other statistics, I found out that queue number 2 and queue number 3 are called by the same staff members at the same counters. So statistically, you can actually not split it up then. You should look at the whole group at queue number 2 and queue number 3 because they serve by the same customers. So the next thing I did is, and in this case, there were only 3 branches. I thought, let's look at, does this differ a lot between the different branches? In this case, there's branch A, B, and C, and you see some differences in numbers. But the most customers wait outside the service level in branch number C, not in branch number A and number B. Now, branch B performs quite better than branch C. And if you do this further analysis on, where is this bottleneck on those in this branch, it's better to only look at one branch because the bottlenecks are very often not the same in different branches. So at this moment, I selected Q2 and 3 and branch C to continue this analysis. Then I looked at when do they wait too long. So I split this up in months. And again, this was a pilot system. So they only used the pilot for about 4 or 5 months. So I only looked at the months they used the system really. And the months here told me something. And then after that, I also looked at what you call the weekdays. So is there any difference in Mondays till Fridays? Are there bad days compared to other days? So the month selection I took was November, simply based on the fact that most customers wait too long in November. So I want to know what happens in November. And in the weekday selection, I took Mondays because simply said most customers wait too long on Mondays. So now I'm getting somewhere. I'm getting, what happened in November on Mondays, because there's quite a lot of people waiting too long in those days and those months. I did do a weekday check. I don't know if you understand why, but if you look at the previous slide, it says Mondays, Tuesdays till Fridays, but you always have to check a little bit. Are there not more Mondays than Fridays or something? You know, that differs really per month. So this in analysis, you can do that very quickly. And I can see there are 4 Mondays, there are 5 Fridays. So still Monday is the worst selection, the worst. So I took the Mondays here. So now we filter down to branches, queues, months, and Mondays. But still, I don't really know. Sorry, I had one alternative here because it was a bit of limited data, but you could look at monthly trends. But it's very difficult to look at monthly trends when you only have 4 months of data. You kind of need years or 2 years of data to look at monthly trends, but you very often see them in any business. There are more busy months compared to other busy months, to other months. So the next question then is, why do customers wait too long on Mondays for, what was it, brand C in November, et cetera, et cetera. So the real why question tells you that is really going into what was the bottleneck on those days. Now, if the first thing I looked at is what you call the arrival pattern. So this is the Mondays in November average arrival pattern. So take in mind, arrival is when do customers get into a queue? In other words, when do they get a queue number, you could say. And there's one thing I can see immediately, that is there's a lot of customers taking a queue number already between 9:45 and 10. That tells you something, by the way. That means that probably these brands opened the door and there were already people standing outside, and they all walk in and they all take a queue number. To give you a little insights in that, very often that has to do with an expectation. You remember the SSP minus E formula? That probably means that customers expect that they have to wait long. And what customers do then is they think, you know what, I go very early because then I'm probably the first one and then I don't have to wait long. Not realizing that they actually make the waiting time much higher for everyone else. But I will come to that. So I got this what you call pattern for arrivals. The next thing I put in there is how many customers are actually called. So take in mind, arrived is when people take a queue number. You remember the bottleneck picture? Now they're sitting in the waiting area, and then counters are opened by staff members and they start push this button to get people out of the waiting area. And you can already see the bottleneck moments. A bottleneck moment is simply said when more customers arrive, then people leave. That's what you call a bottleneck moment. So you can already pinpoint where those moments are. So I don't know what I wrote here, but I wrote a lot in this case. So there's a high number of customers called in the first 15 minutes, around 10, but for some strange reason, while there are still more customers probably in the waiting area, it kind of drops. So over the whole morning, they serve less customers than walking into my waiting area, which is not really a good thing, because from that you will see you get waiting customers. It is a simple result. It's a very simple queuing theory, isn't it? You know, people walking in, people are called, which means they leave, or they leave the premises. The rest of that is waiting. And for some reason, over the whole day, they have a bunch of customers waiting. They never sort of get rid of 8 to 9 to 10 customers in the waiting area. And the only reason this is caused is because in the morning, early in the morning, there are 18 people walking in and they're only serving 10. The difference is 8, and the whole day it stays around that value. Well, at the end of the day, they fix that because, you know, they want to go home. So suddenly we open all the counters because now we want to go home, and then we start calling everybody, and then, you know, we're done. So my simple explanation to this client was that, you know, if you would be able to at least serve more customers than the 18 in the first quarter, or maybe just open really all your counters between 10 and 10:30, you will not have this bottleneck so much, and this whole red line will drop to 0. And the only thing you have to do is set all your staff members at a counter for 45 minutes. Too complex? I kind of wanted you to understand what you can do with analysis, you know, how queuing theories works and how you can see that in our data. I also put in here the what you call the average waiting time, but I'm not so interested in the waiting time. I already knew this. If you have waiting customers, you also have waiting time. So over the whole day, on average, every customer was waiting like 30 minutes. And in my view, unnecessary. Now, why I'm yeah, sure.
I mean, you can do this manually, or our clients can do it, but do we also have some automated, I mean, you can program and have an alarm system for this, and then tell the supervisor that it's time to open another register now, and you can also see the patterns and say every Monday you should schedule this amount of people working in your branch and so on. Do we have that functionality?
Not yet.
Okay.
You're talking about where I want to go to.
Okay.
So at this moment you can get this out of data banks, but yeah, absolutely. I think our next step when we talk about operation panel and the future of that, I really want to go to, I think we already even have a sort of name for it. It's called performance optimizer. I don't have that in this training bank, but it would be interesting to talk a bit about that. But that is exactly what you said. This bottleneck moment in the beginning of the day should, of course, create an alert to somebody saying, hey, you know, this goes wrong. If you don't do something, almost all your customers are going to wait above service level. We can predict that. So what you talk about is some sort of predictive analysis linked to alerts, which actually tells people you should take action now. Because now I'm looking at in hindsight, so to say. You know, I'm looking even in November 2019. In this case, I mean that's when I did this, but it's too late. You know, the shit already happened.
Yeah, I mean it's not only the alert; it is also the proposed solution, so to speak.
Of course, it would be interesting to have a small session on that, Bengt, when we have time.
Yeah. Okay.
But good thinking. But the point I'm trying to make here is also how powerful is our data. They didn't know this really until I showed them this, because a report very often doesn't really show this. Although some of the reports you could actually get this out, but it's easier to do in an analysis tool because you can make those selections so easy. So I can also do this actually in Insights, which is this tool we use for QCS and managed service. But I think it's better to show you that in real life. Shall I just show you some real things? Because we have like half an hour left, I think. Maybe it's easier to do that. If there are no other questions. I still have like 30 more slides if you want. We can do that also. Oh, by the way, I have a question. Do you have access to this sales demo system?
Yes. Everyone
Everyone?
does that. Yeah.
Cool. So I think I'm probably already logged out anyway. But I wanted to show something. So if I log in as a specific user, then I would see in an operation panel only the branches I'm allowed to see. So that's not all of the branches. It's a bunch of them. I think this links a bit to a question which was asked before. Was it you, Jamal? I forgot. Somebody asked this.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so in this case, I can see those branches which I can click on now. But if I would log in as another user, an admin user, for example, like this, and I would go to the same operation panel, then you can see I have access to many more branches in US, Middle East, and so on. And that's purely done by access rights for users. Okay, I just wanted to not forget to show you that. I'm going to show you one other system also, because that actually links to the question I just asked myself. Now we need to find that this one. So you remember what I showed here, this analysis. In theory, this is also possible to do in Insights, but for that you have to create a so-called dashboard. And I did that as a sort of experiment, you could say. So in this tool, I also created a 5-step analysis dashboard, which if you look here, you go from step 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I also made a tab where you actually explain how this analysis works. And it's just a sort of, you know, what is the power of this tool? So, and take in mind, this is a demo system, so it's not real data. It's really depending on how many of my colleagues use this system. So the data is really crap, so to say. So look through that a little bit. But this shows you simply, you know, how many customers, where are we? Okay. How many customers are rated above service level? So in this case, 272 out of the 999. And then I could actually apply a filter here if I want to look at this at certain queues, or so here I split it up in branches and I split it up in queues. And if you want to do this further analysis, you just simply make the selections over here. So it comes down to the same thing I just showed you, but you can actually potentially do this in a sort of analysis dashboard also. So if you have any questions on that, ask me later. But when I talked about data in some of the meetings I had, and this was, I must honestly say, it's more a pre-sales function I had then than a sales function, because you always have to be a little bit careful with going into too many details depending on where you are in the sales process. Now, I can imagine let's take it simple. I don't know if you know the buyer's journey we have defined as Qmatic, but somewhere in that buyer journey is a sort of first meeting with the client. So what I'm going to show you now is something I would never do in that first meeting. It's way too detailed. You go into too many details, except when they ask the specific question. But it was much more something I did when, later in the sales process, when people started to ask specific questions. Yeah, what kind of data? You talk about this data, but can you show me something? That's the moment where I sometimes showed what I'm going to show you now. And I also use this in training some of our people on how does our data actually work. So I'm going to business intelligence, and take in mind, I'm working here with an Orchestra on-prem solution. So this is analysis reports I'm going to show you. Oh, yeah, it works. If okay with you, I just close the presentation because it's a bit annoying. So when you log into that system, and I have a few things here, so don't look at that too much because I played in this system and I have stored some recents and some favorites and all that. So normally it doesn't show that. But when I talk about data, I very often just start to create a new analysis report. So I just start here. And then you get a list of data sources you can choose from. Now, without going in too many details, there are different data sources for different reasons. But to start with, I would always start with what we call the visits data source. That just because it contains the most dimensions and metrics, and it's the easiest to understand. The other ones are quite specific for specific questions which need to be answered. So visits is really the one where I always start with. I click OK. And then what you would see is basically an empty page. And you could almost reason that's a bit of downside with this analysis tool. It's completely empty at the moment. And if you just allow me 10 seconds, I could have 1 million numbers on that page. And that doesn't tell me anything then. So one small hint when working with analysis is you normally go from a question. You want to know something. And then that makes you, make the right selections and all those kind of things. But I will just start from something which is more explaining the data, you could say. So one thing I want to know is how many customers did actually enter the queue. And there's a metric for that. It's called entered queue. So I drag that in. And in total, in this system, I have 55,000 something customers. So this is customers who walked in or took a queue number, you could say. Make sense? Now, something else is how many of those were called, which is this one. And you can see, and again, this is a demo system. So the number of customers which are called from that queue is really much lower than the number of customers who entered the queue. And I know the reason why. And the reason is this is used for demonstration purposes. So I have a lot of colleagues using this and they create tickets, but they never call them. So what happens with those tickets, they are removed from the system. And we actually have a metric for that. I can actually say how many are removed by reset. Because at the end of the day, the system resets, and if there are still people in the queue, they're just removed from the queue. So in this case, I have a lot of reset customers. In normal situations, that number should not be that high, because if it is, then you really have a problem. Normally, that's around, how many are removed from the queue is like, 1 to 5% or something. There's one thing I want to say here, and that is removed by customer, because customers can remove themselves. But then you might ask the question, yeah, but how does a customer remove themselves from the queue? Well, the only real way to do that is in mobile ticket. I don't know if you know the function leave the line, but if I take a mobile ticket, suddenly customers can leave the line, and some of them do. And that's this number very often. It's the removed by customers number. So I will actually remove the one by reset. So this makes some sense to me. Now I have a question. People entering the queue and people called from the queue. Do you remember what kind of measure you have in between? I want at least one person to get this. When I enter the queue and then I'm called from the queue, what time is in between?
Waiting time and average waiting time.
I hear somebody say waiting time. I'm happy with that. So yeah, so in between entering queue and being called is waiting time. So this tells me something about the average time those customers waited. And by the way, this is the waiting time of the customers which are called. So this is the average waiting time of the 27,000 something customers. Not of the 55,000, because a bunch of them are removed and we don't count that as waiting time. So what happens after called? Customers are served. And that is just another definition. This is the moment customers are called to a counter. This is the moment the staff member says, now I'm done serving this customer. Okay. So anybody, why is there a difference between called and served? I should not ask questions, maybe.
Because mainly somebody exited
Some
the
of
queue
them left.
itself.
So I didn't hear you exactly, I think, Thibaut, but it is normally the number of no-shows. And what is a no-show? No-show is a customer which is called to a counter but never showed up at the counter, and therefore the staff member pushes a specific button saying, this customer didn't show up at my counter. And that is what we count as no-shows. So, and I know my numbers don't add up exactly, and I will not go into details, but the number of customers called is 27,000 something, served is 26,000 something, and that is because I had a number of no-shows. They never showed up, and that means this customer decided to go into a queue. You know, they really did that. You know, they pushed a button or they took a mobile ticket or something. They really decided, I want to be served for something, and then for some reason they decided to leave. They threw away that piece of paper with the queue number and said, I go home. And that number is for some of our clients a very, very important number, especially in retailers. I had this chat once with a retailer in a telecom business, and his definition of a no-show was, and if I don't call that no-shows, he said. For me, no-shows are people which go to my competitor because they decided to take a queue number for me, and then for some reason they left. So I assume they went to my competitor because the waiting time was too high or it was too hot or whatever else, but they decided to go somewhere else. So that's how we looked at it. In other businesses, they don't care so much about that number. In public, you know, it's not so convenient, but it should tell you something. If your number of no-shows goes up, it's very often related to high waiting times. And take in mind, those people actually, they either go to your competitor if you're in a commercial business, or one day they will come back, because if I need a new driving license, I need a new driving license. I need to go. I will come back someday. You understand the value of these numbers? Take that in mind. So another thing, another metric we have here between called and served is how long does it take to serve this customer? And that is transaction time. So we have that one also. So this is the average transaction time of, something went wrong. This is the average transaction time of those customers served. It's only 2 minutes and 5 seconds. Again, these numbers are quite unrealistic. This is a demo system. You know, my colleagues play around and they do all kinds of things. This is not a real business, but I'm just trying to make the point. It doesn't really matter what the numbers say. This is the average time it takes you to serve customers. Okay. Now, this is just everything in a line, but of course I could go further than this. I could say, okay, but you know, is this any different per branch? I can put in branches here. And I have a lot of branches in my system, you know, a few, too many maybe. So maybe it's easier to filter that. I don't want to see all branches. I only want to see my headquarter branches. So I can filter that. I select those. I put those in, and now I'm only looking at my headquarter branches. And some of them are finance, healthcare, public, but that's because of our demo server. Now, this tool also has some nice features. You can, for example, do some what you call conditional formatting. So I can quite easily see, okay, you know, a public, city south public is much higher than downtown healthcare, for example. And probably I also have complete different, let's say, average waiting times. Yeah, they also have much higher waiting times. But again, I'm not looking at real customer data, so don't draw any conclusions out of this. But I'm just showing you the power of the tool. It's quite easy to continue with this. You know, what if I want to know more about this City South Public? Then I would go here. Was it City South Public? I think so. Oh, doing this correctly. Now I only have this branch on my screen. But I could ask the question, does this differ anything per queue? Well, we have queues also here, so I can put in queues. And I can see that this is, for driving and transportation. I have more than for education and training, and I have a little bit less for building and planning, etc., etc. And there are not so many appointments for building and planning. That's the kind of thing I can see here. Make sense? Of course, you know, if I want to, what am I doing? I wanted to know something about, let's say, building and planning. Let's take one. And of course, then I could take something like, okay, but you know, I have data. This is over all the months and days and years and all that. Let's see how this is per year. So you can see that this demo server is already up and running since 2018, by the way, just for fun. You can do subtotals. So I want to see this as subtotals per. I actually need to learn you another trick. The waiting time average here is 23 minutes. That's probably not really correct because you should look at the aggregated value for that. What I'm doing here is really trying to make you understand how you can slice, dice, work with your data in a much easier way than a report. Try to do this in a report. You have to run another report and make other selections, etc., etc. So these kind of tools work much easier with data than any other tool. I can remove metrics as I want. So one thing I forgot, you remember I said I don't really look at the waiting time average. I more look at waiting time reach, as you call it. So where is it? Waiting time within my service level. Is it helping? I think my system is a bit slow at the moment. So how many customers were served within my service level, this says? Then I could also reason the rest is outside my service level. And that tells me much more than the average waiting time, although it's a bit in line, of course. High average waiting time, a lot of customers waited too long. 35 minutes and 88 customers out of the 129 in 2018. Any questions around this so far? Not yet. It will be later. So I could, of course, create a whole other one. And just for fun, show you something. Do you remember the staff member analysis we did, the staff benchmark? I think I showed a screenshot of that. It's in principle nothing more than, have the staff members here and look at their average transaction time, which is this one, which is, it just took a little while. And then sort this value. It's still refreshing, sorry for that. But of course, now I look at all the staff members in this system, and you might recognize some of the system people. Dasha, you serve customers. I knew it. So what you normally do is actually look at this for a specific service, for one of the services. So I just take one. Where is service name? I don't know which one we should do. Should we do building and planning again? Oh, this one. So this way I could do a benchmark on staff members on average transaction time. I think I need to remove this one. So I have a certain Jurgen, his average transaction time is 136 compared to, I don't know, John is even 0. It is almost impossible, you could say. And again, this is demo data. This doesn't make any sense in the real sense, I mean. But the average transaction time is linked to customer served. So maybe Jürgen didn't do so many customers. So I kind of want to know that also. So normally you look at reasonable figures being, you look at reasonable figures, meaning you look at staff members which served a reasonable amount of customers and what their average transaction times are. But it's that simple. It's not a lot of work to do a benchmark on staff members on transaction time or on performance, you could say. Okay, any questions? You want me to show you more? This has some graph capabilities.
Hank, could you go back to that
Yeah.
real quick?
I'm still there, actually. I just showed it in a graph now.
Oh, no, I was going to ask, you said you could like do it based on the number of customers. Is that a click item that you would actually pull down off the number of customers and say you want to filter it by a certain amount? Under served, to say you want to only see people who served over 5.
You mean this?
You're doing that on the actual, okay, that's I want to know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you. Yes, you can. So normally you would take out, reasonable. I took 20 now, but you can change that if you want, of course. I want to see only staff members who served more than 20 customers, which is a bit low number. In reality, you would do at least 500 or something, but this is a demo server, so I don't have that high number of customer transactions, so to say. You could even add more conditions, you could also say cold is greater than 21. I don't know if this makes any sense, but then you filter on that. Good question. And again, if you want that, you can show that in a graph and all these things. Okay.
I have one question, please.
Sure.
Let's say
This is question 15 minutes left. So
yeah. So the transaction time average, can we have 2 measures out of this and apply filter to do like a trend analysis between 2 months? Or we just need to create a filter?
I'm not sure what you want to see this per month.
Yeah, so I want to do like a month comparison.
Yeah, it's a bit slow, I must say. But what I would do is put months in columns. So maybe filter a bit on months, because now I have all the months. So I should maybe do, just going to do something quickly here. So this is January, February, but sorry, I only have one staff member there, but this is how I would do a month comparison.
Okay, so you added it from a row perspective, from above.
Yeah, I put them in the columns. I didn't put anything in columns before, but I put months in columns. Then you get January, February, and those measures for those different months. It's probably the easiest to compare. Should maybe do. You get the idea, I guess. I'm looking for a bit better example. Something like that. And then you could see this in a graph also for those different people, which is probably easier than to benchmark and to really compare them. My idea was not to go into all the all the possibilities with this tool, but that's how I would do what you just asked for. I forgot actually to have brand column, totals, things like that. There is probably several ways to do this, because you could also have months in the rows, but then I think it's a bit more difficult to compare. Depends on, but you could do it also this way. But again, this is the benefit of an analysis tool. I can choose that. I don't have to ask professional service to create another report where months are in columns or in rows. I can do this myself. I can just move things around. I could also have the people in the, the persons in the columns and the months in the rows. Really depends on how you want to see this. So, and another thing you can do here is when you create something you want to keep, you can actually store it and give it a name. So you can save this as a file, basically. So I can just give this a name and say I want to have this and save it. because then next time I don't have to start from scratch. I can pick up this report I created already and just make some other selections or check if the numbers are still okay or did that change and things like that. Like I said, when you do the bottleneck analysis, you normally do follow-ups. It's a never-ending story, you could almost say. You try to make changes to the organization, or do a training for staff members that they have to open all the counters in the first hour. Then the next month you should do a follow-up on, did that actually happen and did my numbers improve?
Hank,
Okay.
like reporting, can you also schedule this to be sent out on an email?
Yes, you can. I think so. I did. You don't want me to show you that? Please tell me.
I don't need you to show it. I just want to know if it can do it.
Okay, provisionally I say yes. Where was the other tool? Somewhere here. I don't know if you have access still to this sandbox environment, which might not be up and running. I see at the moment. Oh, it is. So this would be the difference with a report. I can run I just take one, a Q summary report, which gives me some sort of the same information. I'm not sure how this is a bit slow system, but I just want to try to make the point that if I want to change the visualization, you cannot do that in a report. Now you basically get a predefined, you could say, piece of paper showing you something in a certain way. So in this case, there's no data in this system. Sorry for that, but it shows you something in a certain way. And if I see, oh, this is strange, I want to, then you need to run another report with other selections, etc., etc. So I just try to make the point that this is then such tool as this is easier to work with. Now, I mentioned already earlier that we are working on a data API, and I foresee that although this is a quite powerful tool, the way I showed it here, and it's not like we're going to end of sales this very soon or something, but I foresee myself in the future that this tool will actually go away and you will actually use any other tool, and very often the tool the client already uses. Because this is one of the problems we got here. We did trainings of this for clients, but very often we see that they say, yeah, but we already have a tool. We already have a BI tool. Can we not have the data in our tool, which our people are already used to? Why do they need to learn this tool? So that's a bit where I'm coming from. And on the other hand, I think it's still very powerful if you have some knowledge on how to work with this. So I really urge you to go to the demo server and play around with this, and also be able to be able to demonstrate this to clients potentially. At least have some knowledge around these stories, which I just did. Throw in number of customers entered the queue, served and called, and do some slicing and dicing. At least it shows the power of the data, because the power of the data is not in the visualization tool. The power of the data is in the data. Okay. Any other questions? I hear nothing.
Hank, this is George again. How does this compare to our competitors?
Which one?
The business intelligence section specifically, is it something that's shared among competitors, or are we unique as are most of them just dumping their data into somebody else's system?
I'm not. It really depends a little bit on which part of the world you are in also, because we have quite a lot of competitors, but some of them are very small in one country or even in an area of a country compared to some of the larger ones we have, like NemoQ and Qnomi or ACF. There's a bit of a difference
QNet.
there. Sorry?
Like QNet.
QNet, I don't know what they do actually. I know they have a reporting tool. Do you know more?
It's a Chinese company that mainly is killing me in Nigeria.
Aha. And do you know what kind of reporting they have, or dashboarding, or something else?
Actually, the whole thing they have is pretty amazing. Most of their devices are wirelessly connected, so the setup fees are way less. I haven't seen any of their reports yet. I'm trying to get some of them to see how.
Yeah, I would be interested in that because, as I said,
Yeah.
we did some competitor analysis, but it's not always clear to us. Also, if you look, for example, on a website of one of our competitors, you very often see fancy graphs and all that, but it doesn't mean that that's the system they're selling.
Yeah. But yeah, their solution is much more much less expensive actually from ours. That's why they are crushing it in the market.
Yeah, I think pricing is another subject in a way. You know, I do know that we have some challenges as Qmatic to set pricing levels which work in the whole world. And I do, because you mentioned Nigeria, was it?
Yes, Nigeria.
Yeah, so I do know that we have in some cases we have an adjusted pricing for some of our partners in certain countries, and that really depends on the competitive situation you're in. But it's not something I can really take a decision on. That's not really on my table. Can I put it that way? Only indirectly. So that is something to discuss with your channel managers, or is that Tarek? Maybe, I guess.
Tarek and Samer, yeah.
And Samer, yeah. So that's where that is. You know, how do we put competitive pricing depending on competitive situations? I heard of QNet before, but I don't know everything around them. But in general, I do see that you know, all our competitors have the same challenges as us. Let's be honest. I mean, that's very often how it is. And the challenge we have, and I already mentioned something like that, is that there are clients which have a high demand on very sophisticated visualization tools with predictive analytics and all that. And I think all our competitors, which are originate from queuing and appointments, will have a challenge developing that themselves. And I don't think they will do that. They will rather do what we do, either data API or incorporate some system into the system they already have. And we did that in the past. The thing you're looking at now, which we call business intelligence or analysis reports, which is part of that, is actually from another company. It's something we OEM in our solution. But also there are always challenges because you are depending on what they develop, where they go, what their direction is, where they put their money on, so to say. So I myself, at least, and you're very welcome to contradict with me, you know, to give me feedback on that. I foresee that the better future is to have a very good data API, which makes it easy to use any other tool to visualize our data. And that's where I also think the money is. You know, you don't
I
necessarily.
believe actually I'm with you on this. I believe let's say a reporting API would be
Yeah.
much cheaper actually for any of the customers anyway.
Yeah, and that's the other benefit, because if they already have, for example, Power BI, they don't have to buy the tool.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean we don't charge for the data, but that charging for the data is on another level than having 40 developers developing visualization tools.
Exactly.
That's very, so it is for me very much linked also to be much more in a competitive space.
Yeah.
Although I showed you this tool as a tool which we actually sell, I'm not going to do that now, but I could do exactly the same in Power BI with the proper data API. I can show you the same value, the same sort of metrics. They might have other names and all that, but that doesn't matter. It's about the power of the data, and you can show that in any tool. And then the benefit of, I played the last months a bit with Power BI, and the real benefit of Power BI is also that there's a whole community around it which creates visualizations. There are also other companies, third-party companies, creating visualizations. That's all kind of graphs and tables and I don't know what. And you can make use of that. So that's actually the direction I think is also a powerful part of that direction. There are communities around it. Take in mind the training aspect. I showed you this now, but actually I think you almost need to train your clients to use this in the proper way. But if you go to Power BI, you don't have to train them on using Power BI. You only have to train them on our data. I'm not saying that's not a challenge. You still need to train them, you know, what is our data and what do we store and what are the different metrics, and you need to understand the system, everything I told you about in the beginning of this training. But I think it takes away that burden of at least having to explain how does the tool work.
Yep.
Okay. That was it from me. I give you 3 minutes back of your time, or any more questions? Cool. Damien,
Yes.
I didn't make updates to the presentation which I gave you last time, so it's the same one I showed now.
Okay.
Although I did have more slides in there, and I didn't go through everything, but I want to leave that in because I think it's good for people to understand that. It's quite self-explanatory. I just want you to have those slides.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much, Hank. That was really good.
Cool. With that, I say see you next time.
Yep.
Hopefully.
Right.
And if
Thanks
you have
very much.
anything, or if you have any question, business intelligence or data or reporting related, just don't hesitate to send me an email or find me on Teams or whatever way you can find nowadays. Okay.
All right. Thanks very much,
Cool.
everybody, for coming today.
Okay.
And see you tomorrow.
Thanks a lot. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for listening to me. I hope you didn't fall asleep.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
It would not have been the first time that people fall asleep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cool.